Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. I'm your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this latest Thinking Out Loud, where, looking at the conversations in the board gaming space and offering to trying to put out something, constructive, a way forward through some of the conversations. This is a very unique one. I'm a psychotherapist and I do culture. I don't do technology. I do not. But there is a topic or a kind of a cluster of topics that are coming up that not a lot of us know about, but I feel like it's worth knowing because it's coming in a way. And we'll talk about this stuff. We're talking about NFTs. We're talking about blockchain. We're talking about Web 3.0. We're talking about very new iterations that are coming to the board gaming space, but I'll say a lot more in a second. This man put up a tweet talking about an aspect of this, and has his show Game Tech has an episode of it dedicated to blockchain, these kind of things. So I figured I'd invite him on. He did a little bit of homework and he's going to help me out. He is a game designer du jour. He's the former host of Ludology, sometimes comes back for spot appearances, but he is one of the grandfathers currently of board gaming. He is Geoff Engelstein. Welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jason.
All right. Thank you so much for coming back on. We're gonna talk about blockchain, which is something that in board gaming you'd never think of it, right? There are some publishers, and I think there's some current publishers that are moving forward with NFTs, right?
Yep. Yes, Simon and some other folks have made some noise and saying, hey, they're thinking about moving into the NFT space. So it is certainly topical.
What is that? We'll get into all that in just a second. We're going to try to, I don't know anything, but I like to think of myself as an educator. So I do a lot of reading and then figure out how we can kind of, come up with the 101. Explain it to me like I'm 5 years old. So this is I can get to the level of a 5-year-old, which will really cheese off people who really know what they're talking about. But what are you going to do? But before we get to that, did you know, I'm surprising with this, my show now has a sponsor. So I am going to show you my sponsor. This show is sponsored by Super Skill Pinball. Ramp It Up, the sequel to Super Skill Pinball, which, wait a minute, I have the designer right here.
Yes. If you want to switch and talk about that game instead, that's way more inside my comfort zone. But
it is the sequel to Super Skill Pinball. I own both. I'm very happy to have both in my life. It is the roll and write sensation that was getting people through COVID, and it was the first one so popular that the second one was launched. So before we get into this whole thing where people are just gonna oh my god, what's going on? Give the people what they want. Give the people some game insights, Geoff. What did you do with the roll and write sensation that is Super Skill Pinball? Ramp it up.
I learned a lot from doing the first one and getting feedback from people, and was excited to dive in and design new tables. I mean, one of the fun things from a designer perspective for Super Skill Pinball is it's such an open-ended system that there's so many different ways to plug things in, and pinball machines do so many fun things that had a lot of ideas I wanted to jump in, and WizKids was very happy to go for it. And the big thing was to use there's two boards for those who haven't played it. There's like a table board and a backglass board, like a pinball machine. And in the first one, all the game elements were really on the main table. There was a few things sometimes on the backglass for mini games and stuff like that. But the number one complaint we had about the first one was that there was no ramps. We had bumpers, we had targets, we had all those things, but there was no ramps. And so we looked at it and said, hey, we could actually put half a pinball machine on the back glass also and have the ball move around, and gave ourselves much for real estate. And, as we said, ramp it up and give some more exciting toys and different options to play with. So there's 4 totally new machines in there. Each one of them brings in some new crazy mechanism that kind of puts a little twist on the system. And
even the basic board, the board that is like right in the starter is going to have that little ramp thing in the back, the gopher board or whatever it is. That's fun. We have one board, the wrestling one, which is a team board, so kind of cooperative. You could play as many like any roll and write. You can go up to 99 as long as people have boards, and just roll it along. But here there's introduced the element of cooperation with the wrestling board. My personal favorite of the new boards is the robber. I forget
High
exactly.
Roller Heist.
That's the one. I love heist games anyway, but like,
Yep.
having to deal with like a moving element in the board. So it's like, depending on what the moving element is, where you hit it and all kind of thing, you get different points. Again, great when a designer has a chance to go back into their system and just continue to iterate, it's going to be better and better, as long as it's not like a pure cash grab, which is this is certainly not. This was definitely a reiteration of Super Skill Pinball, and if you liked the first one, you might really like this one.
Yep, and if you want to just try it out, we actually there's a sample table from Ramp It Up, the Go for Gold table you can download for free from the WizKids site, and there's 2 tables available from the first pack that you can grab for free. And we just posted a Christmas theme table, which is now completely available for free. It's on Board Game Geek under the Super Skill Pinball and Files.
Nice.
That just is it's not going to be in a pack, as far as this is the other ones you could get in a pack, but this one is just kind of on its own, and you can just buy it and laminate it or whatever, and just play for free and try it out.
Very cool. I would not accept this as a sponsorship if I didn't like the game. I'm not sponsored by these people. just
I drive a hard bargain. You wanted me to come on the show. I said I will only do it if you hold up Super Skill Pinball at the start. So
absolutely. So Super Skill Pinball 4K, wrap it up. Go ahead and check that one out. But now we will get to the topic du jour. We gave you people your gaming chum to chew on. Okay, so we are going to take the hard shift and talk about this technological stuff that is now kind of in our lives as gamers. And I'm going to, as best as I can, try to split up the conversation. I told Jeff I was going to do this ahead of time into 3 moments. The first one is probably going to be the most difficult because it's the most technical. Because, we're talking about what is blockchain and why is it a big deal that Kickstarter is moving to blockchain? And this I think from what I'm reading, Jeff, I mean, there's all these terms, there's NFTs and there's proof of work and all this kind of stuff. I feel like blockchain is the place, like understanding that concept is a place to start in terms of these new things. Is that a fair assessment? Kind of,
yeah, blockchain is kind of underpinning the whole thing.
Blockchain is underpinning the whole thing. So, like we're 5 years old, Mr. Engelstein.
Okay.
Give it your best shot. Blockchain.
Sure. So basically, if you think about, a lot of, businesses, if I own a business and people come in and buy things, I'm going to keep a list of everything that people bought. So I may say, Jason bought a copy of Super Skill Pinball and paid $20 for it. And Jeff bought a copy of, looking on your shelf back there. Ooh, Space Alert. I'll buy Space Alert.
Oh yeah.
Jeff bought a copy of Space Alert. And so you have a list of each of those, right? But they're separate from each other, and I could sneak in at night and I could go into where it says, that Jason bought Super Skill Pinball. I could erase Jason and I could write, Sally bought Super Skill Pinball. So that's like a basic database or something like that, where there's a separate line for each transaction. So what a blockchain is, it's basically that exact same list. Okay, except when you add the next line, when you add the line that says, Jeff bought a game after Jason bought a game, it kind of uses the Jason information and uses some other stuff that I won't get into, but basically, uses cryptography to create the Jeff record, that if somebody changes the Jason record, that the list doesn't make sense anymore. So each entry kind of depends on the one before it, and ultimately, so everything is, each one of those things is called a block, and they're a chain because they're all linked to each other. So later, if somebody goes back and tries to mess around with something earlier in the chain, it's not going to work anymore. It doesn't connect. Mm-hmm. So that's the basic idea of what a blockchain is. And it was kind of developed. The technology was developed, initially around attempts to create alternate currencies. Cryptocurrency and Bitcoin is one of the earliest examples. The idea ultimately was that, hey, right now, all those transactions, like, your bank has a list of all those transactions in your account, right? But, the reason that you say it won't get changed is you trust the bank. The bank is a central authority or a certifying authority. The bank's record is the record. And if all of a sudden the bank's record gets messed up or whatever, then, you got a big argument on your hand to try to convince them that, your copy of the statement is correct or whatever, right?
Mm.
So in that case, we've got a central authority that says, I am the final arbiter of truth. And the idea with blockchain is, hey, can we make a system where there is no central authority, where that information is spread out, and there's no one person that can say, or can change it, or can mess around with it, or that you have to rely upon to have all this information.
Yeah. So actually, just to build on that for just a second, because it's so important. Okay. So in my reading, and Geoff, we can go back and forth, Geoff and I, because we both have different understandings. But in my reading, so much of the move towards blockchain and move towards these kind of like opens, visible, like you can see it right there, or someone who can code can see it. I can't see it. People who see comes from just a kind of a distrust of official, like you said before, the sources of authority, right? So then I just listened to this independently, but it definitely folds in. So then you had the housing crisis in 2008. And this was all recorded in a podcast called Meltdown. It's on Audible, and you can go listen to it. It's really important, but it sets a lot of context, I think, because what happened during the housing crisis. So you had these a lot of mortgages went underwater, and banks are kind of giving out these screw mortgages, and they're just not being very good actors, lending to people who clearly shouldn't have the money, but like for whatever reason they're profiting by like just giving mortgage, and building all these basically transaction records, so like, they take the mortgage, they bundle it in what they call security, and they just sell it off to somebody else. That person sells it off to somebody else. So then you have this huge chain of ownership. Look at your houses, people. Who owns that house? You're always getting like, oh, well, your mortgage got sold to this place. Your loan got sold to this place. Your mortgage got sold to this place. And what ended up happening as the economy melted down and exploded, that these renters or people who are owners who are on a mortgage are trying to find who owns their house, and they can't do it because the paper trail is just a mess. And what ended up happening, and you can look this up. This is not conspiracy stuff. There was a settlement on this. You can look this up. It's all public, that the mortgage lenders would actually just kind of like make up who owned the house. Like, okay, a house has a title. So then, I don't know where the title is because it got chopped up into a million pieces and sold off and whatever it is. So like, well, I own the house now because I'm going to write this down. And you had people that were just hired to write, forged signatures and just make a whole hash of this whole, like who owns what transactions are what. So in Geoff's kind of example of like, well, Jason owns something and I'm going to go in and like to say that Sally owns it, that literally happened to the scale of billions and billions and billions of dollars with people's houses and other areas, as well as the financial system kind of collapsed. So a lot of people lost their homes and a lot of people got screwed. So you have, kind of post that, in the 2010s, you have all these, you have all this anger, and you have all these, people who are educated, and they're trying to kind of solve problems. So they're not just trying to solve this kind of like general kind of problem, like, how do I track transactions? They're trying to solve the specific problems that are created by high frequency trades and, financialization of the markets. There's a lot that happens. And I think there's written into the system that there's like a distrust of authority. It's all about, you hear these people, that's all about transparency, giving power back to the people. It's very much anarchist, which is in my soul. I get that. I don't know that I'm going to go there, but at least in terms of the rhetoric and where it comes from, that I can understand. So for me, I understand this kind of move towards that transparent ledger in that context of like, can we trust the traditional actors who normally have guardianship over our data and our transactions? And for a lot of people, it's no. Transparent. Let's try to do something else. Am I off on that? Or is that something that's kind of in the context of what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that the issue is that it's, and again, this is going, the details of it are maybe going a little bit beyond my knowledge. So I will freely say that. But my understanding of the systems is that, yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying in terms of that, but it's these blockchain systems, you know, if you've got something, you can go and say, hey, you know, I own this, and this is my piece, and here's the block on the chain, and here's the record of what it is, right? But if you just look at the blockchain and you're trying to figure out who owns what from that's a much more difficult problem, right? And that's like, you know, all these ransomwares that are paid off in cryptocurrencies, and the cryptocurrencies move, and then the FBI's got to try to trace it down. It's not like there's a list there that says, oh, it went to this person and eventually was, you know, went to this bank account, or it's owned by this person at this IP address or whatever, right? It's not, it's much more opaque, which I think is part of what the privacy advocates are looking for. So I'm not sure in that particular case where you were trying to track down who you're trying to find out who owns stuff. I think you can prove maybe that you own something, but or try to prove it, make it a little easier in certain circumstances to prove it. But I think if you're trying to go through and find out track down all the people that own certain pieces, or took, you know, if you slice something up and sold it to 100 different people, I think it would not be super easy to find that.
Yeah, so like they're trying to solve the problem, but it's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, it's a super tough problem to solve. Yeah, I mean, especially with the securities, and that's a whole other huge mess.
And I'm not saying like one was. I guess I'm not saying like one is to the other. I guess I'm kind of like, I think in terms of like stories, it's shelf stories. So I'm trying to like kind of tell a story of blockchain. And it's not like, you know, oh, all these coders are trying to solve the financial crisis. It's like, okay, there was the societal context is this kind of growing distrust of central authorities. You know, like I don't want like all these people to have my data. I don't want like banks to have my data. So like, how can I come up with, or how can we come up with solutions to kind of get around some of this stuff? As we'll get into cryptocurrencies in just a second, but like, okay, so now blockchain is one of the proposed solutions, you know, of like, okay, now we have this potential thing that has a potentially open ledger, and it has, and you know, that sounds great. And you're going to hear these people like, you know, they always say that the really great parts, and then they don't really share about the less good parts. So then you're starting to get into the problems. You know, it's not as transparent as they might want to say.
Right. And yeah, I don't know if you want to jump into some of the issues with blockchains and stuff now. We can talk about that. Or
I think we have a basic understanding of what blockchain, at least for the 5-year-old understanding. It is a ledger.
Maybe a 7-year-old. I felt like I was aiming more at a 7-year-old than a 5-year-old. But
it is a ledger, right? It is a digital ledger that theoretically can be read a little bit more easily than other ways of storing it,
and can't be hacked. Is the idea also. Right. So
then if it's hacked, then there's a record of it. So like even the hack has a record.
Yes, you can tell that something happened. You can tell that something corrupted it. So then the question, the next thing is okay, so where is this ledger stored? Right. So if there's no central authority, there can't be just some place in the cloud where there's one master copy of this ledger. And the answer is that everybody who's participating in it has a copy of the ledger themselves.
So then what we're used to is, you know, they call it like, so these terms, right? Web 2.0, Web 3.0. So like in Web, quote unquote, 2.0, big tech, Google, Amazon, you know, Apple, these are the, you know, the big purveyors of information. If you ask that question, where is the record stored? They're going to say in my server or on my cloud, like it's mine. Right. There's a very much, you know, the era of tech, the era of the big tech that we're used to, like they have the information. And for the most part, consumers are kind of okay with it because we get so much stuff out of what they provide. Right.
Yeah. But there's other levels too. I mean, there's one thing that's, you know, there's like, Visa's got their stuff in the cloud, and you know, you go Visa and all that stuff. But then there's also, you know, a lot of the basic underpinnings of the internet just have these certifying authorities, these master things, like, you know, even like, you know, DNS, right? When I type in, google.com, right? It's got to go, somebody's got to turn that into a number, and there's a whole system where that gets turned into a number, and there's ultimately one, you know, computer or a small number of computers that know those numbers. When I type HTTPS, right? When you go to not HTTPS per se, but when you go and it says you go on to again, I go into google.com or I go on to PayPal, right? And it says in your browser that it's certified that it's PayPal, right? It's got a certificate that says that, this is actually PayPal. I mean, that certificate comes from a certificate authority, which is run by an international organization that has different levels, and the certificates get pushed out, and they have a way that's managed and stuff like that. So yeah, we deal with these centralized databases all the time. Maybe we don't realize it.
Yeah, without realizing.
You have to trust like their certificate authorities, and there's been instances where somebody is able to spoof one of those certificate authorities, and that's a real big problem on the internet if somebody's able to do that and pretend that they're that ultimate authority.
Right. Okay. So then that is the problem that is one of the problems that blockchain is attempting to address.
Right. So the problem, of course, is that with this is where it can get a little bit technical, but just kind of on a conceptual level, right? Is you've got the same ledger now you've got copied all over the place. So in order for them to stay synchronized, so when somebody makes another transaction and it gets added to the end of the list, okay, it basically gets, the of who's going to actually create the block, because there's like I said, you got to do some math and stuff to actually create the next block in the blockchain to make sure that it's cryptographically attached to the previous entry, is that goes out to, a random person, and that gets into proof of work versus proof of stake and stuff like that, which we can talk about a little bit if you want. But it basically goes out, it gets delegated to somebody out there. Their computer goes, chunks it, figures out the block, sends it out to all the other, kind of distributes it to all the other people, who then can look at it and say, yeah, it looks like this was done right. And there's a vote. Basically, it's kind of like a behind the scenes vote on whether everybody agrees that this looks okay. So now somebody's not adding a fraudulent block onto the blockchain and corrupting it. And then everybody kind of adds it and updates it.
Now, when you talk about everybody, is that like every computer or every living person?
No. It's the people that have copies of the ledger. I think it may be some subset of that. It's getting into a little bit of the hairy details that I'm a little fuzzy on, but conceptually that's what it is, and it's a lot of people. I mean, the whole point of the ledger is that it's thousands or millions or whatever of computers have copies of the ledger and are updating it and going from there to make the changes. So it's usually the people that are kind of participating in it that are making those judgments.
So you have this,
I mean, you can kind of feel in your, can kind of picture some ways that this could potentially go wrong or have problems or whatever. So, which we can get into some of those tricky parts.
Yeah, I mean, the idea being like, we talk about crowdsourcing a lot, right? So in a way, you're kind of crowdsourcing authority, right? Is that a good way to understand it?
Yeah, to a certain extent, that's part of it. Yeah, yeah. Okay. But again, that starts to, as these things get bigger and more distributed, first of all, it can be much slower to do a transaction, and be a lot more time consuming and energy consuming. And that's where it gets into it. I have to dig out the stat. I probably should have been prepared for this discussion. I looked it up earlier today and I stat, but it takes like, 1 million times more effort to do a blockchain transaction than to do a Visa transaction, right? It's because to do a Visa transaction, you send it to one transaction to Visa and they put it in their database, right? With this one, it's got to go out, it's got to find a computer that'll do it, it's got to do it, it gives them a transaction fee, they create the blockchain, they create the block, they submit the block to all the different people evaluate it, vote on it, decide if it's valid, add it to their own blocks. It's a lot more intensive to do one transaction in a blockchain than it is in a central authority.
It sounds so like, romantic in a way. It's like, okay, well, it's not going to be one authority. It's going to be for the people. But then imagine like, it sounds like one blockchain. It's not actually one blockchain is what I'm hearing. Like it's multiple copies of the blockchain without an actual master block, right?
Right. And there's multiple. Yeah. And there's like a blockchain for Bitcoin and a blockchain for Ethereum and a blockchain for, the squid one that turned out to be a complete ripoff or whatever. There's every single one of these is a separate little blockchain. Again, there can't be one master one, and sometimes they break them up. If they get too big and unwieldy or whatever, they'll try to divide them up, or there's other reasons why you may want to fork off different blockchains from the main blockchain and stuff like that.
So now you're mentioning the cryptocurrencies, right? So I think that we're going to have as good a good understanding of blockchain as a 7-year-old would. And there's many of them. It's not like there's one master block. It's like, there's at this point, I don't know, millions. of blockchains
Yeah.
out there, and you can have like a private blockchain, like me and you could have a blockchain right now, just the
Sure.
two of us.
Yeah.
It's not like a big monster thing. It's just like this, it's a way of storing information that can be public or private or whatever. That's a little bit different than having a central authority. Okay. So now we have these blockchains that are producing these currencies, right? The Ethereum and Dogecoin, and different ones. So talk to us a little bit about cryptocurrency and explain kind of what it is and what problem that is trying to solve.
Well, again, it's basically trying to create, I mean, a concern that people have, and I'm not going to get into the economic theory and things like that, but, I mean, currencies, particularly, off the gold standard, et cetera, and I am not advocating in any way that we should go back to the gold standard, but,
right.
Currencies are controlled by governments. And, if the US Federal Reserve wants to print a bunch more dollars, they can just print a bunch more dollars, right? There's
infinite. It's weird, right? They talk about like mint the coin, like they can literally print a $1 trillion coin that resolves like all this debt and stuff like that. And they can just do it.
Because, right. Because of yes. And that, that can freak some people out, and I can, kind of get that. And, basically the idea is, hey, let's create a currency that's independent of any specific government. And so, it can't be manipulated. We don't have to worry about, a currency going cross borders. It'll be more stable. It'll be, it's all these other positive attributes.
Mm-hmm.
That's so Bitcoin, I think I don't know if it was probably was the first one that was kind of to do that. As part of the, in order to have a currency, you can't just have it be, again, it can't just be like sand on the beach. It could be seashells if you live in a place that doesn't have many seashells. It's hard to, if it's hard to get seashells, but it needs to be something that's some sort of a scarce resource. Right. So how do you create a scarce resource of digital tokens? And basically there's certain types of mathematical problems that can be very difficult to solve. So basically the idea is that you solve these math problems, and when you successfully solve one of these math problems or find an answer to a math problem, you get a coin. You get a token for it, for solving the problem.
And so, you're talking about, like, again, is the you a computer or is the you a person?
The you is going to have to be a computer. These are really, really complicated.
Okay.
Like factors, different types of factorization problems or things like that. There's different problems.
And that's where they talk about mining, right?
That's mining, right?
That's mining.
You're cranking through numbers, trying to solve these problems, and when you solve one, then you get a coin. And there's different types of algorithms for different things. Bitcoin, the algorithm that they use, the problem is there actually is a finite number of coins. There's a set number of coins that can be found. So, and it's easy to find them at first, and it gets harder and harder to find them, to solve the problems as you go on. Is a typical characteristic. So, a lot of these other people now, want to set up their currencies and stuff like that. And, because it's got a scarce resource, then, the idea is that will give it intrinsic value, and it will, it will have, value, it will have lasting value. But I mean, the thing with a currency is you need a couple of things to happen to make a currency, useful. There needs to be ways to use it. It needs to be easy to exchange it for goods and services. That's the whole purpose of a currency.
Right.
You need to be able to keep track of it, and not just lose it. And you also need to what was the last thing? Currency is, well, it'll come back to me. Currency. Oh, it needs to be stable. If you get into hyperinflation situations and stuff like that, it creates economic chaos, like, Germany before World War II and stuff like that.
So in a way, like the blockchain is a way to solve those problems. So like the blockchain is stable, right? The blockchain is, what are we called? Very different. The blockchain is stable. The blockchain kind of tracks stuff, right? It's tracking stuff. And the blockchain, it bakes in this kind of model of scarcity, right? So it's like,
Right.
or at least like the way they've designed it. So like it's
Yeah.
basically they've designed this thing partially to generate this thing called currency, an alternate currency to what the governments are offering.
Right. But I would argue that it hasn't really accomplished really any of those goals, arguably. So first, it's not easy to exchange for goods and services. There are some places that were taking Bitcoin and stuff like that, but to do a Bitcoin transaction, like if I go to the grocery store, it's hard. You got to go in, you got to transfer it. There's a whole process. I mean, maybe there's infrastructure that can make it easier. I'm not going to get into that, but especially if there's now how many tons of different cryptocurrencies are there, right? I'm not going to accept, if I'm running a store, I'm not going to accept anything, right?
Mhm.
And so, it would need to kind of, there need to be a standard, whether maybe Bitcoin's at, Ethereum tends to be popular for NFTs or different coins that are popular for different topics. Or for
Well,
different,
we'll get to
different
NFTs in
purchases.
just a second, people.
Yeah.
It's coming. It's coming.
But also, but the other piece is stability. There has not been any price stability with cryptocurrencies. Yeah, I mean the technology is basically okay. There's big problems with some areas which we can get into, but probably don't have time. But the price of Bitcoin has been all over the place. Elon Musk opens up his mouth and it drops by 70%, or it goes up by 50%. That is the exact opposite of what you're looking for in a currency.
Okay. Right. So the technology is stable, but the value is just the opposite.
Right. Right. I mean, it's got all the earmarks of a bubble, of a classic commodity bubble, whether it was tulips or whether it was, internet stocks in the 2000s, or whether it's Beanie Babies or, whatever it is, right? They all are the same thing, where people outside are looking at it saying, why this thing doesn't have any intrinsic value that I can't use it. I mean, tulips, at least you can plant or whatever, but the, Beanie Babies you can play with, but the value of it so outstrips the utility of it. And also it can gyrate wildly. It seems to be going up, and people start buying in just because they want to make money speculating on the product, right? People buy Bitcoin because I don't have dollars in the bank because I think my dollars are going to be worth more than, more later or whatever. I'm not speculating on dollars. I mean, there's foreign currencies you can kind of speculate on and stuff like that, although things are a lot more stable than they were in the 80s and the 90s in that area. But, people are buying Bitcoin and Ethereum or whatever, and these, the crypto bros or what have you that are in there, they're hyping it up because they want it to go up like a stock, right? They're treating it like a speculative investment. It's not a currency.
Right.
And it's because there's nothing behind it. And that brings in fraudsters. That brings in people like the people that started this Squid Game one and raised like sold $2 million worth of coins and then just ran away and the whole, and stole the money from everybody.
Oh no.
It happens over and over again, especially, with these, with all these, small coins and stuff like that. It's people, getting out there and hyping it. That'll make or hyping it or bashing it. That'll make the value go up and down dramatically.
I'm so glad you said that, because like Bitcoin and all this stuff is new and we're having a hard time understanding it, but speculation is old. Right? Like even human beings have speculated on stuff ever since there's been economics, which is ever since there's been money. They speculated on Christopher Columbus crossing the through world. It's like, okay, buy a little piece of this little ship, and I don't know what's going to be over there, but like it could be amazing. It could be the world. And so it's like a little deed of land or something, or a little piece of your ship could be worth thousands of gold at that point, or nothing. You're taking, it's a big gamble, right? And the people that are actually taking the voyage are like, okay, hey, I know what's out there and blah blah blah. They're hyping it up, and at the end of the day, there was nothing solid until the voyages happened, until the land was found, and now we start to get like deeds and stuff like that. Now that's solid, now that's real, and the people who took the risk got huge rewards. Right. I mean, that's kind of the whole model of nowadays of like, taking huge risks, getting huge rewards. And we're kind of primed as a culture to buy into that in some ways, I think.
Right. But a lot of that stuff, like if you're doing land grabs or, investing in, there's different levels of what's ultimately there. Right. And, a Beanie Baby to pay, $1,000 for Beanie Baby. There's something called the bigger fool theory. You're familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
Which
that sounds
is,
like a game tech. I'm sure that was a game tech.
I haven't done it yet. I should. But I mean, the bigger fool theory, goes to the heart of the speculation stuff, which is that people buy it assuming that there's a bigger fool than them out there that they're going to be able to sell it to at a higher price. Right. And, same thing with Beanie Babies. People weren't paying $500 for the super magic unicorn Beanie Baby because I don't know, some intrinsic value or whatever. Right. They bought it because they thought they'd be able to sell it for $1,000 in 2 months, that there was some bigger fool out there that was going to, keep bumping it up and buying into it or whatever. It's the same thing with this other stuff in the cryptocurrency and NFTs. At least a piece of land. Maybe you overpay for it now, but the land will always be there,
right?
Unless it gets washed away in global warming or whatever, right? But
I guess I wanted to
land
relate
is
it.
land. If you overbuy a house, pay for a house, you at the top of a bubble. Hopefully, if you can keep at least making the payments on it, you can stay there, and hopefully it'll come back or whatever, right? There's some intrinsic value to that. There's not intrinsic value to these current cryptocurrencies. There's not intrinsic value to Beanie Babies. There's not intrinsic value to NFTs.
I guess, relating it to 1491, right? They didn't know what was over there. It's contrary to popular belief. Most people knew the Earth was round. They just didn't know what was over on the other side. So if you're investing in that voyage, you don't know, right? Literally, they could be land, it could be just a bunch of water or whatever it is. So
but your analogy is a little bit flawed, I think, because in that case you're buying a share in something that's going out there may happen, right? But a better analogy is if that's what you want to use as your thing was the Europeans sailing across and finding out about North America or South America, right? Is that a better one is that everybody's buying into shares, but the shares are going crazy up because that's the hot thing, is to be in on these voyages before it even leaves. Columbus he's still out there, nobody even knows it's coming back.
Hasn't even left.
Everyone's trading it up, right? It hasn't even left, and everyone's trading it up, 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 right? So it's that's a different kind of a thing, I think.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the idea being that there's not a there, not yet. And
right.
I mean, could there be? What do you? I mean, obviously you don't have any. You don't know, but is this a pure grift, or is there a potential something there and that people are grifting on top of it? I don't know what your read on that is.
Look, I don't want to yuck people's yums.
Sure.
To use a phrase, right? But I think that I think that cryptocurrencies and NFTs are scams. I think that there's we can just maybe is a good chance to opportunity to jump into the NFTs and Absolutely. What they do on this.
Sure.
But it's people speculating and buying this stuff hoping that it goes up, not because they're and the art, I hear about the art market, which is a whole other interesting conversation. But if I buy $400 million for a Picasso or whatever, right? Or, it's not, is it really worth $400 million? I mean, things are worth what people want to pay for them, right?
Sure.
But at least if I'm, and there's a lot of other stuff in art, shady stuff with tax fraud and all kinds of crazy stuff, which we'll get into here. But, but ultimately I've got a statue that's got some history. It's got, I've got something, and I can decide the value, or a collectible card. Even if I'm buying, I paid a couple $100 for a special copy of Cosmic Encounter. That was one of the first ones that was ever done that was in mint condition, right? I could buy a copy of, so utility standpoint, I can buy a copy of Cosmic Encounter for $30 or $40 or whatever it is now, right? I don't need to pay hundreds of dollars for a copy of Cosmic Encounter, but this one has some meaning to me.
Sure.
And that's with a lot of different things. People buy wine and hold them and look to flip them. So I understand that that's part out of it. And I understand that, that with NFTs that people are trying to tap into that same idea, this is a collectible. And so it kind of gives people cover maybe to overpay. But let's talk about what an NFT really is.
Yeah, an NFT is a non-fungible token?
Yes. It's the world's worst branding for something. think ever. Fungible?
Right.
Fungible means it can be changed from one thing to something else. That's what fungible is. It's like if I have $5 and you have $5 and we swap them, we both still have $5. They're completely interchangeable.
Right.
Whereas these tokens theoretically are unique in essence.
Completely unique. There's not another token, and it's a digital token. It's a thing that is.
It's not even a.
Right.
It's on the ledger.
On the ledger.
That's
a piece of ledger.
It's a block. It's a block in the blockchain.
Right.
That's what it is. That's what you're getting.
A unique, completely unique. There will never be another one like it in the world because the blockchain will ensure that there will never be another one like it in the world.
Right. But then the question is, what does it represent? What does it mean? Right. So what they're, so I don't know the exact history of some of the first products of what it is, but traditionally, when this started, it was used, NFTs were used for like JPEGs and certain images on the internet. But I guess they were also used early on for like, you could get an NFT of the first tweet, or like the NBA was offering NFTs of like certain highlights, right? Certain plays, this Michael Jordan dunk in game 6 or whatever, right?
So how does an NFT get made? Is it made in that same like kind of mining process that you would get the Bitcoin, or is there a different process to like how'd you do that? How do you get NFTs?
Anybody can create an NFT at zero cost.
Okay, so that's not like a mining thing. It's just like, okay, I'm going to make an NFT right now. Just like I have a picture and I'm going to put it on the ledger. Boom, NFT done.
We could take a screenshot of this thing, and because it's basically, all I'm doing is I'm basically selling you. It's crazy to describe, because when you describe it to people, they're like, how could anybody possibly pay anything for this? It doesn't make any sense.
Sure.
Okay, so for example, let's say you want to buy, I'm going to take a screenshot of this podcast right now, boom, screenshot. Very good. That's beautiful. That'll go for $350,000 right there.
Pure joy.
So I'm going to say to somebody, I'm going to sell you, I'll send you a picture of that thing, of that picture. And I will, but anybody else can screenshot it out of the video. But I'm going to send you, I'm calling it the official one. And you're going to give me money, and I'm going to make a permanent record on this blockchain here, the Ethereum blockchain or whatever. I'm going to create a permanent record that says Jason Perez got that screenshot. Right. And you can then trade that token. You can sell that token to somebody else later if you want to. Okay. But it doesn't mean that you own the copyright to it. It doesn't mean that you're the only one that can have that screenshot. Anybody else can do a screenshot. It doesn't mean that, it doesn't give you, it doesn't even mean that it like publicly then says, if you look at that screenshot on the official video, it doesn't say your name in the bottom or anything like you got it. It's nothing. I mean, the thing that I liken it to, and I don't know if you remember these, although I just checked, they're still doing them. So there was a big thing like 20 years ago or so, and I guess they're still out there, where you could buy a star for somebody as a gift.
Yes.
Okay.
They're doing a lot of that, like by Amazon Rainforest.
You can't, not like Johnny Depp, but like a star in the sky.
Right, star in the sky, yeah.
Yes. You don't even get to name it. You just get to buy the star. And what do you do? What do you get if you buy a star? I looked on, you get a certificate in the mail that says you own this star from all the stars are given like, NG7365-M2 or whatever the official designation is.
Right.
And that's what you get. And you give somebody that gift and say, you own this star. It shows you a picture of where it is in the sky, but you don't own anything. You don't really own anything.
Nothing. Right.
And that's what an NFT is. An NFT is that, except you don't even get the piece of paper that says it. It just logs it somewhere. And I just did, before we came on here, I was just curious if it was still happening. I Googled buy a star, and there's starnameregistry.org that'll do it for $20. There's cosmonova.org. There's starregistration.com, starregister.org, starregistration.net. And so am I buying a unique star? No. There's actually one of them that will even sell you constellations if you want a constellation. They'll sell you a whole constellation. That's a deal, right?
Wow, Cassiopeia. Wow, I'll take it.
Yeah, they could, somebody else. I'm sure you can sell Cassiopeia to somebody.
Sure.
It's the same thing with NFTs. An NFT is like buying a star. Maybe you'll get some fun, cute pleasure out of it, knowing you had this. That I've got this NBA highlight.
Right.
You know, that I got the rights to this highlight, or I'm the owner of this highlight. But again, anybody can do it. So who are you even buying it from? I mean, if I'm buying it from the NBA, then yeah, maybe they're not going to resell it. But I mean, there's been tons of instances, since art is a big popular thing for NFTs, of people selling NFTs of other people's art that they don't even own.
Right.
You know, so it's vapor. There's nothing there that you're getting.
I guess,
and it preys on the fact that it's confusing, because it sounds like, and you see these threads on Twitter or whatever, where somebody like paid $300,000 for an ape JPEG. It was a famous one. And then he started going after all these other people, like posted it and were like using it as their avatar. And he's like, I'm going to sue you all. I'm going to, go after you. You can't, this is my thing. It's like, no, you don't own any rights to this. You've got nothing for this. It's not, Okay.
Well, I'll play a little bit devil's advocate from my limited knowledge.
Sure.
Again, I'm trying. Anybody who knows computers, just, go ahead. Don't comment. Just don't do it. I may just shut off comments because, save my embarrassment. Anyway, so let's say it's CMON, right? And I don't want to pick on CMON, and I don't know which ones they're selling, but I know what CMON games are. I mean, they have Zombicide and they have a couple other games. So I'm selling a original NFT of the original box of Zombicide, like a picture of the whole hordes and all that kind of thing. Yep. And so CMON says we will not do this multiple times. We just won't. We're going to do it one time, and I'm gonna put the JPEG in, make the NFT, sell the NFT, and there's going to be a ledger. So then someone can put that same screenshot of the Zombicides and all that kind of thing, but it won't have that record back to CMON. It will be somewhere. It will just like, okay, Joe Schmo put up this thing of Zombicide, same picture, same exact thing, but it doesn't have that link back to the original publisher. And that's a different thing. Like now I have a different thing. Now I have something that came from the original publisher. Is that not worth at least something?
I'm sure it's going to be worth something to some people. And I mean, here's another analogy to think about it. I mean, let's say, and people do this on Kickstarters, right? Somebody will say, hey, for $200, you can name this card, or whatever, right? Or we'll, this Dominion card could be, I'll own the silver card, right? So, for some of them, it's fun. I've seen people put their names on it. They put their faces on it, something like that, right? You're paying a little extra, you're getting something like that.
Sure.
It's kind of, it's fun. It's cute. I mean, are you really getting something? No, you're not, you're not getting a copy of the original artwork or anything like that. But, you kind of contributed to it in a certain way. But imagine if you paid extra to get that card. Say, this was in a Kickstarter and they had, it's Dominion, right? And they say you own the dungeon card or whatever. Is there a seller? There's a seller, right? See, this is where I'm throwing off my Dominion knowledge.
I'm sure there's 100,000 sets. I'm sure there's one of everything.
It's got to be. I know this is a seller. Anyway, let's say that I get the rights to the seller, the seller card. Right, I'm the buyer of the seller. I would want at least. I wouldn't just want a link that I now get a certificate link to. What am I going to show to people? I mean, at least if it says in the back of the rules, seller by this, or if they had a page on their website even that says, seller sponsored by whatever. Right? It's like naming rights for a stadium. You want your name on the side of the stadium in some way.
Right.
Okay, so I've paid $100, and I am now the owner of the cover of Zombicide, the image of the cover of Zombicide.
Image of the cover, yes, it's
right.
It's just an image of the cover.
Yeah. What does it really mean to people? What is it? So I just feel like people, you know, and I'm not looking to slam people that might be into this or something like that, but I feel like it's preying on low information low information consumers, right? Like, you know, it's going after people, you know, trying to prey on people's emotions, prey on their emotional attachments to certain games and certain properties and certain IPs, and not really giving them anything in return. And NFTs are not the only example of this in the world. I mean, there's plenty of stuff like this where, you know, you get it, you know, where you can overpay for stuff, you know, like concert tees. Right? I go to concert, you know, you're going to pay $50 for a t-shirt. It's not worth $50 for a t-shirt. At least I have a t-shirt, you know, at least I can say I was at the concert or whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, as consumers, we're manipulable like that into overpaying for stuff that we have an emotional attachment to. And NFTs to me are like the purest form of that. It's like, you don't even get something you can hang on your wall. You don't get something you could put on your drawer. You get a link. And they could even change the link later. The link might not even, you know, last, whatever. You know, it's like a link to some ledger. And again, it goes back to that non-distributed thing, because it's, you know, even though you're getting a link on the blockchain and the blockchain is distributed, the link is pointing to a website somewhere that says that this link corresponds to the cover of Zombicide, right? The block in the blockchain doesn't say it's the cover of Zombicide. The block in the blockchain just has a web link that points to something that says whoever has this web link corresponds to Zombicide. But if CMON decides to take that down or whatever, they go out of business, that's gone. You've got nothing.
So that's the whole, I mean, that's not supposed to happen, right? Isn't that not supposed to happen? Like, you know, the whole point of that ledger is that it's permanent.
The ledger contains the link. The ledger contains the HTTP:// link to something that describes what that is. The thing you're getting isn't in the ledger. The video clip of the NBA dunk that you're getting is not in the ledger. What's in the ledger is a pointer to the YouTube or whatever that says this YouTube video, the owner of this link, you know, has this YouTube video. And if that YouTube video changes URL or whatever, you're done. You don't have it.
Wow. Okay, that's even worse.
Yeah,
I'm learning that. I'm trying to understand this stuff, but that sounds even worse. I guess like, so well, speaking to your issue of like, okay, why are like, because there's a lot of fraudness around it, right? Like, I mean, I really want to understand, right? These companies I trust, they're big companies. Apparently, they're supposed to be good with money, right? I mean, CMON is clearly good with money. It's not like they're like this 100-year-old company. They were very successful rather quickly, right? You know, so like I think that they must know what they're doing. So like, if they're getting into this, then I think something tickles in the back of our brain that it's like, well, there must be something to it if they know what they're
it's
doing.
A great deal for the person selling the NFT. You know, it doesn't mean it's a good deal for the person buying the NFT. I mean, and you know, I mean, it's to take it to a different thing. I mean, Kickstarter is, you know, ultimately you're supposed to get something tangible at the end of it. But I mean, Kickstarter is another thing that's a bad deal for the consumer for the most part. You know, and that's why CMON is, you know, CMON gets $2 million and then a year and a half later they produce a product.
Right.
You know, it's great as a company. As a company, you'd be foolish. If I was a stockholder and the company I own stock in said we're not going to do Kickstarters because, you know, we think it's, you know, we think it's a bad deal for the consumer, I'd be like, well, you're leaving money on the table.
Right.
You know, that's the way to do it. And same thing with this. If I'm a shareholder in a company, you know, what's your NFT strategy? That's a hot thing at the moment. It's not illegal. It's not regulated. You can do it. You know, you've got, especially if you've got IP and things that people might want, then, you know, that's the way to do it. But it's, you know, it's trying to leverage people's innate susceptibility to hype, susceptibility to collections and collecting stuff and accumulating, and the FOMO.
And also our loss aversion. I think it plays in our loss aversion as well. Like, so speaking of another advertising for Mr. Engelstein over here, his book Achievement Relocked, which I have read over the past year, which details loss aversion, how you can leverage loss aversion in making your game. Loss aversion being the human tendency to overrate, you know, when we lose things, when we risk losing things. You know, like there's always that paradigm, like, you know, losing feels worse than winning feels good. right? So like
Right.
there's a reason, there's a psychological reason behind it, and you could like kind of like leverage game design behind it. So please read Achievement Relocked. It's pretty good. It's on purchasable on Amazon. It's a real thing. You can have it in your tablet. Uh, anyway, so like the loss aversion aspect of it is that like, you know, CMON is offering this. I shouldn't pick on CMON because it's a lot of people. Like, I mean, even smaller publishers are looking at it, and
Yeah.
they're, you know, people, you know, because for them, they're like, oh wow, there's money on the table. People willing to pay for these things. We got to look into it. So then, you know, these companies are selling these things called NFTs. They're confusing, but you know, I think our loss aversion kicks in and says, well, it sounds dumb when you really explain it, but what am I missing? And I don't want to
I
miss
must
out.
be missing something because all these other people are really into it. It's the emperor has no
Right.
clothes situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so like, so you really think that an NFT is a emperor has no clothes situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, that's why I tweeted about it and said, you know, I'm trying to, you know, as I may, you know, I think I've got some level of reach, you know,
Sure.
through Twitter and stuff like that. And, you know, I'm trying to, you know, educate people and raise the alarm. You know, do I think that NFTs should be illegal? No,
Mm.
I'm not saying that the government should regulate them and it should step in and there, you know, and is it possible that in the future somebody will come up with a use for NFTs that will make sense
Mm.
and you know actually has some utility? Maybe. I'm always happy to change my mind and be convinced. I'm not seeing it
Okay.
right now. I never seen something that is. So, you know, I think it's my duty to stand up and say, hey, this emperor has no clothes. And, you know, shame on these companies for,
Mm.
you know, trying to take advantage of their fans.
Mm.
So, you know, that's, you know, it's the way I think of, you know, this is, and it's happened in plenty of other ways throughout history. You know, I just watched last night the documentary about Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, but not
Mm-hmm.
documentary, the movie about it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they used, you know, every psychological trick in the book to, you know, take money from people that, you know, had higher aspirations and thought that they were
Mm-hmm.
getting one thing and they were actually just, you know, allowing them to get golden toilets and
Yep.
put in, you know,
Jim and Tammy Faye Baker
fancy stuff and
being,
mink coats and stuff like that.
I believe they were like televangelists in the
Yes. Yeah.
80s
They
or
were
90s.
the PTO club until they went to both. Well, he went to jail for
Mm-hmm.
fraud, mail fraud, and various other things after
Mm-hmm.
using the money to pay off various sexual partners. But that's
Mm.
it's you know it's the same, you know, and I'm not saying that the people and it should go to whatever. I'm just saying that this idea of trying to prey on people's emotions to
Mm-hmm.
make decisions that are not financially in your interest goes back thousands of years.
Sure.
This is just the newest technology innovation, and it tends to happen on things where people don't understand it technologically because it's like you said, it's very confusing. It's easy to
Mm-hmm.
wave your hands and get people excited and say, "Wow, this is the new whiz bang thing." So
Mm-hmm.
whether it was a new, you know, in the 1800s with the snake oil and the medications and stuff like that, where people didn't really understand what worked and what didn't work, you know, it's easy to flim flam people when you're, you know, or when it's a confusing topic that people are emotionally tied to. And that's why people tend to, you know, that's why there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of, you know, like you said, you know, gang mentality. What am I missing out on?
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of those other tricks
They
that have
must know
been
better.
right.
They
All
must be
those other
missing
tricks that have
something.
been
Yeah.
honed for thousands of years
Mm-hmm.
are right back at the forefront again.
Interesting. So we circle back right to our forefront, which is psychology. I mean, this is where we're a lot more grounded here. So I mean, this is part of why I wanted you on the show, because like you were really strong about it. And I wanted to kind of explore some of the topics. And you know, I have other people who are into some of this stuff, who are into quote web 3.0. And I think that, you know, in terms of at least the blockchain end of it and some of the cryptocurrency stuff of it, they're trying to solve their problems. They're trying to, you know, the problems of authority, the problems of, you know, like currency and all that kind of stuff. They are trying, like things are being tried. But when it comes to like these specific applications, like especially the NFTs, now we're getting into the more griftier aspects of it. I think that, is that a good read overall of the situation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I believe that. I mean, I think particularly the newer crypto, I think Bitcoin, when it started, that they had the best of intentions. I think a lot of the newer crypto coins are just pure speculation,
Got it.
get people hype, pump and dump stock kind of stuff.
Okay. So
Um, But then the other aspect, which which we kind of have touched on a little bit, is the environmental aspects and things
like that. Exactly where I was going to go. So that became the thing. So like a lot of especially the smaller publishers, because CEO's not going to listen because they have they have their stockholders. They're publicly traded. I think they're publicly traded at least on a one exchange.
They were at one point, yeah.
Yeah, at one point. So like that, there's an ethos there.
I think they still are. Yeah.
So they're listening to their stockholders, and the stockholders have no reason to not look at this stuff. But there's smaller publishers that are like, okay, there's money on the table, I'll do this, and they got piled on by a lot of folks in the Twitterverse and social medias. Not so much in the grift aspect because that's hard to understand, but the environment stuff, which is a lot easier to understand. So then talk a little bit about the environment aspect and how that plays out. If you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, we talked, and I have numbers available, and it's always very difficult to judge numbers on this stuff. Sure. But for sure, doing a transaction, as we talked about, in terms of like the amount of computing power that's involved in doing a transaction on a blockchain versus just sending a transaction to the Visa database is a huge ratio. Mm-hmm. So if you multiply that by, all of the Visa transactions that happened every day, if they were all converted to Bitcoin transactions, then it would be huge. Now the amount
set the world on fire.
The amount of environmental impact that a single transaction has, a single NFT has, is very difficult to calculate and depends on a lot of factors and stuff like that. I think that the reason people have glommed onto it is because it's, like you said, it's an easier thing to wrap your head around. Mm-hmm. Just saying, NFT, you kind of get a JPEG of something that's not really yours, but, and maybe you're wasting your money, but you also burn down half the Amazon rainforest.
Oh, there we go. I understand
that. Now I understand what it is.
Right.
But it's very tough to do that, to kind of take those actual measurements and what it is, and it's going to vary depending on the way the technology is implemented and stuff like that. And some people, when I post about that, simply were on like, well, you make your board game in China and you put it on a boat and you chop down trees to make it, and
right.
Yes, but all that kind of paper pulp is done in a renewable way, and there's a lot of stuff, and I actually have something physical, and but there's arguments, and I understand there's arguments made like that if I get on a plane and fly, or am I doing it for a good purpose? And then some people say, well, do carbon offsets, which should be a whole other show, because carbon offsets are a whole other nightmare that are just things a fig leaf to make people feel better in my book that aren't actually accomplishing what they want them to accomplish.
Yeah, when big business is like talking about carbon capture and carbon offsets, then there's something shady, because
right.
It sounds great. I guess greenwashing would be the term. It's like, okay,
yeah, that's a very good word for it. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it looks good on paper, but there's a lot of it. And there's been some, just. It's interesting because it's game theory aspects of it too, because there's been like people actually chopping down more forests in California because of the way the carbon offsets, like the loopholes and states, and all kinds of crazy stories that you read of the way that it's done. Yeah. And that goes back to certifying authority. Again, if I say I'm getting carbon offsets, I'm trusting the person I'm buying the offsets from that they're actually doing what they say they're doing to offset it. Mm-hmm. Nobody's physically themselves planting 10,000 trees. They've got some company that says, oh yeah, we planted all these trees and you can have a piece of them.
Right.
But anyway,
so getting back to because the way board games are made now there's environmental costs. And I think that's a separate conversation, right?
Right.
And I want to have that conversation.
And the sustainable board games and stuff like that, I think that's a great conversation to have about all this stuff. And people have to, kind of pick and choose what they're going to do and stuff like that. I think that, I think it's kind of adding, I don't know which generates more waste, is, a Beanie producing and shipping a Beanie Baby versus creating an NFT. I've never seen that kind of a comparison about what it is in terms of it. So I don't know what it is. So, I think that though there's certainly environmental implications that need to be looked at, particularly for something which is not, I don't think, that has any real utility in the world. So, I think that people need to look at it from that standpoint. And the problem is because, it's a lot easier to make 1 million NFTs than it is to make 1 million Beanie Babies. So, so it's the scary part is that this stuff can all of a sudden scale up massively. And then if the blockchains massively scale up, and it's just, it starts to snowball.
Right. I think the probably the best way to think about it, and again, layman, 7 years old, is that not that it necessarily will, because it actually says in the Kickstarter announcement, because we didn't talk about Kickstarter specific, but they moved their operations over to a blockchain or a series of blockchain, whatever they do. Um,
I read that announcement like 8 times, and I'm still not really sure what they're doing. But I think they're setting up the block. Yeah, they're potentially moving some of their some of their stuff to a blockchain type, more of a distributed thing. But they're trying to set up in an open way so other people can use the technology. And they were very kind of vague and hand wavy about it.
Yeah, trying to solve a problem, but like their problem, not the consumer's problem, and trying to convince us that we have a problem, which we don't. Which is fine. I mean, I guess like. I mean, the thinking about it, because I mean, they use the word carbon neutral in there. So like that they're one of their, whatever they're doing, whatever they're setting up is like a carbon neutral things. And like, I don't know anything, like, because that's where you get into, you mentioned before, like proof of work and proof of, all these other things. Like, and there's different like, those two different aspects and many others will determine how energy intensive the operation is. So there's certain parts of it that could light the world on fire if it gets away. And there's parts of it that maybe could be powered by renewable energy at some point down the road. And it's a little bit more reasonable to manage. That there's a big giant question mark there. So I think it might be fair to say, maybe they won't set fire to the world like right now, like as directly as you might think from like a Twitter thread, but it's not out of the picture.
Well, yeah. Look, I try to take a balanced and nuanced approach to this stuff. I mean, it's easy to take a broad brush and say, "Oh my God, NFTs, blockchains, they're lighting the world on fire." It's evil, evil, evil. But you gotta. It's everything's got to be on balance, and you've got to look at the different aspects of it. I mean, there's plenty of other stuff like there's machine learning, AI, and machine learning and neural networks take a huge amount of computing resources. Just a tremendous amount. And I was looking at some of the stats for like, the AlphaGo and stuff like that,
What's that?
The alpha systems or the big blues, the one that won Jeopardy, and the amount of energy and, to use those and run those. And now those are becoming more and more ubiquitous in facial recognition algorithms and, just spreading everywhere. Right. And they use a tremendous amount of energy, and there hasn't really been a reckoning on that. But, it's always hard to balance what is the utility that you get out of it versus the energy that you spend on it and how you do that. And at the same time, I'm sensitive to saying, oh well, environmental stuff is irreplaceable. It's not, we're on a, it's hard to value that and weigh it against a utility function. But we're hoping that we're moving to more renewables and things like that will help lessen the impact. It's just it's a complicated issue, but it's hard to opt out of machine learning in a way. Like machine learning is so baked into a lot of stuff and things that you use and you don't even know that it's out there. But NFTs, to my mind, serve no purpose and burn a lot of juice. And it's easy to step away from that and say, I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to encourage other people not to do it and stay away from companies that are trying to do it.
It was a cost benefit analysis. So like in terms of machine learning AI, we see the world and we see the world kind of moving in these, like things that were like my washing machine is smarter than it was. I'm like
and you're looking very dapper because of it.
I put it in, I put clothes in, and before I would just put the clothes in and would wash. Now it like knows how much time and how much detergent to put in, and it spits out kind of extra detergent. So like when I hear about like AI or like the other like smart technologies, I see it. And so it's like, I'm willing to kind of hand wave it away, which is weird, right? Like same thing with board game, right? So like, I'm willing to hand wave away the fact that it's coming from China, like, causes all this, ships and, shipping in general just causes all this waste. And, ocean acidification. Like you could go down the whole list of like the things that there's the cost, but the benefit is, ooh.
Right. Yeah. And everybody's going to kind of make that judgment on their own, I think, of what it is. So yeah, I understand that. And I'm sure your washing machine is your washing machine is probably using less water, using less power, using less detergent, because it's right sizing it to, whatever you're doing. So in the end, the extra energy that's spent on, developing it and using the AI and stuff like that is paying off down the road. So it's a complicated problem. It's, very little stuff is black and white.
Right. But at least going back to the NFTs, your judgment, and I cannot speak to it, but your judgment is that in terms of the energy that it uses, because it does use more energy than a Visa, way more than a Visa transaction. In terms of the value that it generates, it's a big nil for you.
Yes, I don't see the utility of it. I mean, I feel like if somebody really wanted to like sell collectibles or something like that, there's better ways to do it that are going to be less impactful on the environment and less just appealing to people trying to flip them and speculate them on, and thinking that there's a bigger fool out there that they're going to be able to sell it to.
All right. The last thing, and I mentioned it a couple times here, kind of circling back to just blockchain itself, like Kickstarter moving to aspects of their company to blockchain, and you read it 8 times, you couldn't really make heads or tails of it or whatever it is. And I think you had a Twitter thread that you had got an email saying, okay, here's one of the real reasons.
I don't know if you
and then there was another
kind of disavowed that.
And then there was another thread that said, no, this doesn't matter. So like, kind of a way to evade government authority, EU authority in particular. Again, going back to the anti-authority, kind of go around things, a streak that is in the current mood. So in terms of
and it's certainly, I mean, that's why it kind of rang true when I read it. And I probably should have done, I usually do more research on that stuff or post something like that. I didn't this case because all the articles I found that were talking about it were in French. And although I took French in high school, I was not at a level where I was ever going to be able to parse these dense technical articles. So I kind of, took it at face value, but it turned out that it's probably not the case.
Probably not the case. But so we're back to like why Kickstarter went there. Is it a big deal? Because
this is to avoid authority. You're absolutely right. Yeah. So it plugs into that narrative.
It's a big deal because a lot of people online, and and that kind of radiates out, are like, well, we can't use Kickstarter anymore. Okay, now there's pressure on smaller publishers some of whom watch the show. They're getting pressure from their consumers saying, don't go on Kickstarter anymore.
Right.
Yeah,
I know.
Like, what do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to better if I could clearly understand the case about why they felt they wanted to use blockchain technology or what problem it's solving, right? That's what I always look at. I mean, are they really solving a problem that, this is the best way to solve? Then I don't think that anything that uses blockchain necessarily is evil or bad, or you should be boycotting it. There's use cases for it, but I think I look at it on a case by case basis. Somebody just start up Squid Coin because Squid Games was popular and they think that, that's not a good use of blockchain, right? If a bunch of banks get together to use it to track interest rate pegs like LIBOR. I don't know if there was a whole interest rate thing because one bank controlled the interest rate, the London Interbank rate, one or two banks, and they manipulated it. But if it was, if that was distributed between like 100 different banks, it would be much less likely that it could be. So that might be a valid use for it for doing those kind of transactions, right? So I don't know. I'm reserving judgment on it. I mean, I have a Kickstarter, hopefully that's going to be coming out in the spring, launching in the spring. I've been thinking about, do I want to keep it on there or move it to some of these other platforms? But I'm still trying to learn more about it and, be able to make an informed judgment rather than just from a place of ignorance or, just a preconceived, kind of purity kind of a thing. Like if that's a pariah and anything that even whiffs of it is like, that's it. Right. Got to get kicked to the curb.
And that's hopefully, this podcast, this conversation helps publishers, helps consumers kind of cut through that initial, kick and, really gets to, hopefully from the 7-year-old perspective, cut through some of these issues a little bit. So, trying to move the ball forward.
And if somebody, look, if you're a publisher out there, a game publisher, and you've come out with what you think is a fantastic idea for an NFT that's going to take it to the next level and is going to, make it worthwhile, and there's a reason for it, and this is why it needs to be done with technology, let me know. Sure. if it's cool and it makes sense, I'd be happy to put it out there and explain why I think it is. But right now I'm very, very skeptical of what it is. But I would never close the door on something permanently.
Right, but for now, So yeah, I will accede to your wisdom. There's only so much reading that can do it. And once again, it's like I read, I look at it from a psychological perspective, I look at it from the stories perspective. Like what is the story of what's going on now? Right now, the story seems to be, a group, an energy that's kind of like, oh, maybe jumping out over its skis a little bit, it's worth kind of laying back, taking the time, and just like, letting it play out. We're not going to lose anything of significance. It sounds like. So it's worth just kind of chilling out and just watching what happens. We don't have to form immediate judgments, at least at this point. So all right, so that is our show for today. Thank you so much for shedding some light. Is there anything that we missed? Is there any aspect of this conversation? Seems like we wanted to get to the NFTs or
probably
grift part.
I'm sure we missed stuff, and I know I oversimplified some things, and I know there were some other issues that I glossed over. We just didn't have time,
sure.
And I'm sure that there's some stuff I said that may be incorrect. So yeah,
right here, this guy.
Feel free to reach out to me.
I say incorrect stuff all the time. It's all good.
Okay.
But NFTs are a grift. That's the main thing. That's why you're on the show.
Yep, they are. In their current form, they are. Yes.
In their current form, they are. All right. Geoff Engelstein, thank you so much for making the time to stop by my show.
Thanks for having me.
If you can change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.